Welcome to the SpiritRx podcast, Ancient Wisdom, Modern Healing. In this place, two healers come together, each walking a different path, yet bound by a common purpose. Dr. Luke, a quantum chiropractor, and Dr. Hummel, a naturopathic doctor. These two practitioners have dedicated themselves to a vital quest to unite the timeless remedies passed down through the ages with the powerful discoveries of modern medical science. For they understand what many have forgotten, that true healing honors both tradition and innovation. Should you wish to learn more of their stories, their practices, or how to walk this path with them, you will find that knowledge in the link below. And now, let the healing wisdom begin.
Welcome to this edition of our podcast. Today, we are really excited to have Mary Hummel join us. Mary, would you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and just the origins of how you came to the place where you are now?
Sure.
Welcome.
So thank you. I'm excited to be here. My name's Mary Hummel. I'm a nutritionist. I didn't start off life as a nutritionist. I had a pretty poor eating growing up. I actually did not grow up in a healthy manner. I did eat plenty, and it was the 80s and 90s. My mom was very thrifty, which is great for finances, not so great for nutrition, though. If you guys ever...
Wonder bread and bologna, huh?
Yeah. If you think about, when you go to the grocery store in the discount section and they've got the canned foods that are like dented and some of them don't even have labels. Yeah, my mom was the one that buys those like 10-cent cans. She shakes them and makes sure she can know what's inside or at least have a good guess. But some nights was surprise meal. Whatever we opened in our can was what we ate. So a lot of creamed corn on toast, which perhaps is not the best option for nutrition, but that's how I grew up. And in college, even, I was known for eating Oreos and milk every night. It was not healthy, but I owned it. I was happy. I didn't know much better. So Oreos and Skip-Bo were my college years. So I actually finished my bachelor's degree and then got married. And when I got married, I decided to go back to school just for fun because I really enjoyed learning. And I was actually excited about learning science, which I had never been excited about before. But I married my husband who was all into science, and that got me excited about science. So I took two classes that kind of changed the way that I thought about things. One of those was a human disease class. And it just dove into all sorts of diseases and how the body works and how the body fights against disease. And then the other was a nutrition course that dove into the kind of the medical side of nutrition and dove deep into nutrition. And that really sparked my interest and got me all excited about nutrition. Although my diet did not reflect that at the time, it was slow in coming. It took many years to change my diet and to become a little bit more healthier. So
Thanks for sharing that. I kind of heard three things there. One, in our youth, we can get away with a lot of bad diet and still be okay. But there is a point later when that catches up. Another point would be we can always start now, right? If we want to improve our diet, we can always start now. And there's some significant research that shows that you can add years to your life, even starting as late as maybe 60 and making a major change in your diet. You can add 8 more years. And the third thing is, socioeconomic, right? Of course, people that have less money are going to tend to be less healthy because they can't afford high quality food. And all of those things are significant. And thanks for sharing that.
The thing that I picked up from this when you were talking about your experience, and I agree with Dr. Luke with this, is I think it's so important that people recognize that you can make a change at any time in your life.
Absolutely.
There's no limit. You're 95 years old. You're like, maybe I have 5 years to live, maybe less. That's still a great time to change, because if you make those changes, you're going to have better quality of life.
Right.
that's exactly right. No matter where you're at, whatever stage you're at in life, you can make the changes and it's going to make your life better either way. Doesn't matter if you're 50 or 85 or 105. Or a teenager. Teenagers can do it too. That's the best time to start when you're young.
True.
Yes.
So when a new client like walks in the door, right, and is feeling overwhelmed by all the conflicting nutrition advice that they run into out there, where do you start with them?
I try to meet people where they're at. Nutrition can be really confusing. So, getting a baseline of what they've heard, what they're confused about, meeting them there, and starting with things really basic. You can even just start with like hydration. Hydration is huge in nutrition when it comes down to it, but it's simply water. It's really not that complicated to start there. So, saying, let's look at your hydration. How much fluid are you taking in every day? A good goal is to aim for half of your body weight in ounces per day. So if you weigh 200 pounds, you're going to aim for 100 ounces of fluid intake. And that includes water, tea, soups. Those contain a lot of water, things people sometimes don't realize when they're thinking about the hydration. But it's like the base level of nutrition. If you're not getting enough fluids, all sorts of things stop working well in your body.
Cool. I don't want to go too far off track here, but the first thing I'm thinking about right now is plastic water bottles. And I've heard this really interesting little statistic, and this will blow your guys' mind, I think. So apparently, you get in a week's period of time for the average person drinking out of plastic water bottles, they get about 5 grams of microplastics they take in weekly, which
Right.
means they're basically eating a credit card every week.
That's terrible. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
so the type of water matters too.
Yeah.
That's all
It
I'm.
definitely does.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
if you let that water bottle sit in your car and heat up and yeah, fun.
Yeah. Have you ever tried those huge 5-gallon glass water bottles though? They're stinking heavy to carry, but healthier.
Well, I tell you what, this past weekend, there was a family event that I was at, and one of the topics that came up was weight loss. And everybody in the room has an opinion. I actually didn't say anything, even though I have a medical degree, but it was interesting listening to people. Some people are really, they've researched a lot, even though they don't have a degree and they know a lot. Other people think they know a lot because they see things on social media. But like weight loss, GLP, diets, metabolic health, all of those things, that's a hot topic right now. Can you just step into that conversation with us?
Sure. We see a lot of clients and patients come through our clinic wanting to lose weight and interested in the GLP-1s, but not sure about whether it's good for them or not. And there's a huge variety of people. So there's no one answer of this is what works for weight loss. It can be highly individualized. So GLP-1s, they can be really helpful for a lot of people, especially in the world that we live in, where the majority of foods you find at the grocery store are processed and ultra processed and can be highly addictive. So GLP-1s can help inhibit the hunger that you feel, and they can be really beneficial if you can't seem to control yourself around food, which a lot of us, we can't. And that's okay. You can use the GLP-1s to get you to the place where you can start to manage your diet yourself.
We talk a lot about different weight loss strategies, and I'm a big fan of GLP-1s because I think that they help people with the food noise and they
Right.
help people make better decisions, but they're not a permanent solution. And the longer you're on them, the higher the doses that you get on them, the worse the outcomes, in my opinion. Maybe you lose weight, but there's concerns around the other health effects. But that being said, there are other things out there that people talk about with weight loss. So I'm curious if you can talk to us just a little bit about like intermittent fasting, time restricted eating. Like these have become pretty popular. What's the safe version of that? What are some of the cautions around that?
There are a lot of different ways you can implement fasting into your diet, and you want to try and find the one that works best for you. And maybe fasting doesn't work for you. It's really dependent on things. If you're pregnant, breastfeeding, things like that, it's not a good option for you, but fasting can be really effective. So let's talk about time restricted eating. So you can do that in a variety of ways. If you're just getting started, you may limit your eating window to maybe 12 to 14 hours a day. And so you just eat between maybe 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. That's restricted for you. Great. You start there. Once you get comfortable with that, you can shorten that eating window so that you have less time in the day where you're eating. This gives your body a lot more time when it's not actively eating. It jumps into other phases where your body is actually cleaning up the cellular at the cellular level so that you can be healthier. And it also gives your body time to process all of that food that you're getting in. If you're constantly taking in food, your body is constantly storing up that fat because it's, yes, we are in a time of plenty. Let's store it up. You got to give it a break.
I'm a big fan of fasting. I think very highly of it. I think that it's a important tool to utilize in a world that is so much different than the way that we used to be as human beings for a long period of time. We have access to food like we've never had before. And a lot of it's that ultra processed food. So I'm a fan of it. And I think that's a really good, clear, overview of some of the benefits and thinking.
Okay, so you touched on something that kind of triggered an idea for me. Part of it is people used to say you need 3 square meals a day. And now maybe circles and triangles are in the mix instead of just the squares, which is okay. But if we talk about one philosophy is just graze a little bit on something every 2 hours all day long, keep the stove burning, so to speak, versus you should only eat 3 meals or two or one, whatever. And then also what the portion size of those meals should be during the day. Can you give us your thoughts and recommendations around that?
Again, individualized depending on what you're doing, but if you graze all throughout the day, you get up at 6 and you're snacking on things until 10 o'clock at night, that's not a great way in general for you to live because your body's constantly working on digesting, uptaking that food, storing the fat. It doesn't have a lot of time to work on other things. So what happens in your body when you stop eating, it still has to digest that food, so that takes time. But then over time, at some point, your body kicks into autophagy, which is cellular cleanup. And the more time your body has to work on that cellular cleanup, the better it's going to be able to function. So basically, what's happening is your cells are recycling all the little bits and pieces that are broken off during their processes. It's taking parts of the cells and repurposing them and getting rid of the stuff that it doesn't want. The benefit to that is so vast and in so many different ways, but it definitely leads to better health span, better longevity. And so if you can extend the time where you're not eating, then you give your body that chance. And I think it goes back to what Dr. Hummel was saying is that we live in a time where we have access to food all the time. It's not like our ancestors where winter comes and you run out of food and you're having to hunt.
So then for the average person, let's say the average, especially American adult, they're working maybe an indoor job. And so they get some exercise, but like in general, what would you recommend for how many meals a day and what should those meals look like?
The idea, if you're going to eat every day, which some people alternate day fast or something like
Sure.
that, if you're eating every day, depending on your lifestyle, you could easily get away with 2 meals a day, like eating a hefty lunch, a lighter dinner kind of a thing. You can do 3 meals a day if that works better for you. There's not like one great, this is the answer for every person because we all live in such different situations. There is a great option for people if you don't want to worry about fasting all the time. It's a 5-day fast mimicking diet. Prolon puts that out, and it is shown in research to be greatly beneficial for longevity. Doing 3 rounds of the fasting mimicking diet can reverse your age by more than 2 years, your biological age by more than 2 years. That's a great way to implement it. And that way you're not constantly thinking about, okay, I can only eat between these hours. You don't have to be quite as involved in that aspect of things. You can just do that maybe once every other month or 3 times a year or something like that and get great benefits.
Cool. Yeah, I've heard about that Longo.
Okay.
He's that guy doing all the fasting like
Yeah.
research. I think he's in California. I think he has some cool research coming out. And I believe that the fast mimicking diet, if I'm remembering correctly, that they're what they provide in those is exactly pretty much what he's doing in that research. So let's talk a little bit about this. I think this is important because you brought up some really good points. So, can you really go back in time? Here's the reality. We're still aging, right? So when you say people are reverse aging, what are you referring to? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so you actually have your chronological age, but you also have a biological age, and they can differ. So
Mm,
chronological age is how old you are. This was my birthday. This is how old I am. You can't change that. We're constantly aging in that way. But your biological age is how old your body is biologically, how well it's functioning, how much it's aging, that kind of a thing. So I may be in my 40s, but my health is actually in its 30s, or it could be in its 60s. I've seen a lot of people where it's you look like you're 60 but you're actually 40, and it could be related to either disease, diet, lifestyle, all sorts of things. But your biological age is really how well your body is functioning.
So the gut and brain connection is a lot of research has come out recently on that. Can you speak to some of that? Because it's going to directly be related to nutrition.
Yeah. So gut health, microbiome, those are like huge, popular kind of trending nutrition things. The gut health is extremely important. And we used to not know that. For hundreds of years. We didn't know how important the gut was and the microbiome and all the bacteria in there. But not all bacteria is created equal, and there's great bacteria in your gut. There can also be invasive bacteria that take over and make you unhealthy and sick and lead to disease. Gut health is extremely important. So, some of the things that you can focus on is eating fermented foods, yogurts, probiotics. All of those things can help replace the microbiome. And quite honestly, the things that you eat can change your microbiome in like less than 2 days. So every meal is making a difference in your gut.
When people say probiotic or prebiotic, what's the difference for the average person?
Yeah. So probiotics are actually putting bacteria into your gut that you want there. The prebiotic is eating the foods that are going to feed the microbiome. They're going to feed the gut bacteria that you have.
Okay, adding versus growing what's already there.
You're eating nutrition for your microbiome.
So then can some foods serve both of those purposes, the prebiotic and the probiotic?
Exactly. You're getting the probiotic, the bacteria with that food, but also the food that it loves to eat as well, the fiber that's going to nourish those bacteria. So kimchi, sauerkraut, those are great foods to include, and I recommend including them every day in your diet. Just one serving at least.
All right. Thanks for clarifying that. How about this? Stress, sleep, depression, anxiety, those are also big topics right now. And I believe nutrition can be an important part of creating a better plan for that. Can you speak to that issue?
Yeah. Your food can impact your sleep and your mood and your anxiety and vice versa. If you're highly stressed, a lot of people, when they're really stressed, they either have one of two reactions. They're going to overeat because they find comfort in that, or they're going to avoid food and not eat at all because they're not hungry. They're too stressed out about something. Same with sleep. If you get really good sleep, you're going to be more mentally capable of making healthy choices and feeling more confident in those. Same thing with food impacting your sleep. If you're eating right before bedtime, a really heavy meal, it may impact your sleep and you're not going to be able to get as deep a sleep as you would otherwise. So I recommend stop eating about 3 hours before you go to bed at night to get better sleep. It's a great feedback loop because you make one change in a positive way and it affects the other things as well.
One of the things we talked about a while back is the price of groceries. And then if I want to eat healthy, but my budget is really getting squeezed, what are some recommendations that you might make for a family to stretch those grocery dollars, but that are going to be really beneficial to someone's health?
So there are definitely a lot of people struggling with the prices right now. Grocery store prices are crazy. So one of the things you can think about is staple foods that you can eat. You want to go for whole foods, unprocessed as much as possible. Rice and beans, really inexpensive, especially if you're not buying the canned version. You can buy the whole bean and cook it up. It's going to be very inexpensive. Rice, beans, some spices on that, and some veggies. That gives you a complete protein. You can add all sorts of colorful veggies to that. That's a really inexpensive meal that you can change up just by changing up the seasonings. You could throw a fried egg on top of that, and that makes a really simple, nutritious meal for people. But quite honestly, it is really difficult to avoid the processed foods because one, they're already ready made and simple and easy, and we really like the convenience of those. And so you do have to invest time into your nutrition in preparing the foods, which for some people, it could be the freezer meal option. A lot of people like to do the freezer meals where they prep a bunch of food for the month and then they shove it into their freezer and they're ready for the whole month. That's a great option for a lot of people. On the weekends, you could do meal prep for the week. I feel like we overcomplicate our food sometimes and we want to have these really fancy meals, and they don't have to be that way. They can be really simple, whole foods. You pull them out of the fridge, you cut them up, you put them on your plate, and dinner's ready. It can be a tomato slice. And at first, your taste buds may not like those kinds of foods, but the positive thing to remember is that our taste buds change with what we eat. So the more you eat of the healthy foods, the more likely you are to want those foods and not crave the old processed foods that you're trying to get rid of.
That's really a good point. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like the GLP-1s because they shut off that food noise in that sense.
Yeah.
And so it helps people make better decisions and then their taste buds change and then they can prolong those decisions. Again, it's like a short-term thing that you use for benefiting that type of decision making. So I really enjoyed what you said there. And what it reminded me of, the rice and beans component of it, and I just keep thinking about the blue zones. And like, I know that's gotten very popular in the last few years. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And like, maybe what are some of the eating habits of these different cultures?
Yeah, so Dan Buettner actually researched these longevity zones, the blue zones, found all these places. I think there's 5 locations that are known for their longevity, people living past 100, the centenarians. So he went and interviewed people, did a ton of research, found that they had a lot of similarities in their diet. So the zones, there's Sardinia, there's Icaria in Greece. There's Okinawa in Japan. There's also Loma Linda in California. And those are like the Seventh-day Adventists. So anyway, all these zones have a great longevity, and the diets are very similar in a lot of ways. There's unique things to each zone, but in general, they're very plant forward. That is like huge. They eat a ton of plants. They don't avoid fat, which growing up, we were told low fat diet was the way to go. They don't avoid fat. Fat is good. Our bodies need the fat, especially our brain needs the fat.
So there was this very interesting study that I saw where the researchers were having people do the Mediterranean diet versus a low fat diet. And this study was very interesting because they stopped the study because the people that were on the Mediterranean diet were doing so well compared to the low fat diet
Right.
that they felt it was unethical to continue the study. I bring that up because you make a very good point. That diet is not a generally healthy way to live. And for a long time, we thought it was.
Yeah. And I think for me, a premise is that the closer we are to the sun with our food, the better off we're going to be. Meaning that we know that life is coming from sun energy, plants are going to take that directly. That should be our first and primary source of food. The further up the food chain, one animal eats the plant, another animal eats that animal, it becomes more complex. And so then the digestive energy and processes involved are going to become more complex the further up and away from the sun we get. Like I knew I grew up, you had to have potatoes and meat with every meal. And maybe you threw something green in the corner of the plate just to say you had a balanced meal. But that idea, I would say that's counter. And if we look at these Mediterranean diets, for example, that you reference, very plant forward. So I love that point that you're making. So thanks for sharing that with us. And it bears repeating over and over again because we have this paradigm of the way our diet should be, and especially in America, and that needs to shift. And I'm glad that you're taking the lead with that. Switching to another topic, people would probably be surprised at how little education medical doctors have around the field of nutrition. There's thousands and thousands of hours that go into learning medicine, very minimal amount of time spent on nutrition. So sometimes the doctor is not the best person to ask for nutritional advice. Now, doctors that take extra time and learn that, yes, but many don't know that much. So I appreciate that you stepped up into the gap with that. But the next topic is about vitamins and supplements. Some people take zero and then because they want to get everything from their food, and other people take a lot. Recently, I asked a patient to, she was telling me about these different vitamins and supplements. I said, bring them all into me and let's look at them. She pulled out at least 30 different things.
Oh, wow.
And so that becomes clear that there's too much, but then we want to talk about how to sort through all that. So if you could speak to a little bit of those points that I just raised.
It's really dependent on the individual. I feel like I keep repeating that, but that is the case. There are some people that should be on 30 bottles of supplements, but usually they're extremely sick, chronically sick, dealing with cancer, something like that. That's not unusual. However, for the active, generally average American, you don't need to be on 30 supplements. A lot of that comes from either if they're on 30 supplements, they're either hyper focused on supplements. I think the healthier way is to focus on the diet and supplement where our diet is falling short, which can happen. You talked about being closer to the sun in regards to your nutrition, and the world that we live in, most people aren't going out into their backyard to pick food for their dinner that night. Most of us are going to a store, and that store has shipped in that food, and it's taken a week or two to get there, and it's getting further and further away from that nutritious, great state that it was in when it was first harvested. So that's something to take into consideration. If you have access to a farmer's market, the nutrition you're going to get there is better than at the grocery store when that food's been shipped for a week and it's farther away from that nutrition it had when it was planted in the ground.
I think maybe a better strategy for people is to look for deficiencies that they might have in their vitamin intake.
Right.
So there are some good doctors that could help with that. Well, like Dr. Hummel, what would you do if you want to try to identify some possible, let's say, vitamin deficiencies? How would you go about that?
So I think that's a really great question. And there are multiple aspects to that. So there is objective data and there's subjective data. So my experience has been that the objective testing for nutritional deficiencies is not spectacular.
Yeah.
Like some of the tests that you do, they don't really show up in the negatives till you're pretty deficient. And the ranges are pretty insane too sometimes. There's functional ranges and then there's actual deficiency ranges. And I feel like most of the time they're focused too much on deficiency.
Right.
So that's the objective side. So can we look at those things? Absolutely. But I think the most powerful way to assess someone's nutrient intake is to basically do a really good nutritional intake and understand them subjectively, what kind of symptoms they're having, food diaries, which I know, Mary, you do a lot of that. So let's talk a little bit about what you do when you're assessing for those things.
I like to look at 3 days worth of their nutritional intake. 3 days, I feel like gives you a pretty good basis, depending on the person. Some people are really erratic and it can go crazy, but 3 days is a good amount to see in general, what are they eating? And quite honestly, sometimes I have to kind of dig a little bit deeper because people don't feel comfortable sharing some of the more negative things that they're eating. Like they aren't fully honest on their nutritional intake, which I totally understand. You don't want to it's hard to put on paper if you're not eating healthy things. You don't want to own up to it, but it's important to do in the sense of we have to meet where you are and go from there. But anyway, so I like to look at least 3 days of what they're eating. And there's all sorts of online tools, and you can do this for yourself. For the listener out there, you can do it for yourself. Put all your information into one of those online programs like MyFitnessPal or something like that to find out what nutrition you might be lacking in your diet. There's tons of free options out there for that. But I do like to get that 3 days worth to establish a baseline of maybe something that they're missing in their diet and go from there.
One of the things that I really enjoyed that you said, Dr. Luke, is that closeness to the sun, which I think is just a profound tool for people to bring in and say, how long has this been away from sunlight? How close is this to having taken the energy of the sun and converted it into food for us? And I'll share something that I found really interesting. And I ask this question frequently for people, and most people actually don't know the answer to this. So it's quite eye-opening. So if you look at a tree or a
Right.
plant or whatever, and you say, oh, wow, this plant or tree, it's huge. The redwoods in Northern California or
Right.
Southern Oregon, like these huge redwoods. What is the majority of that tree made from? Is it from the nutrients in the soil? Is it from the water intake, or is it from the air? The physical aspects of the plants. Where do they most?
This seems like a trick question, so I'm going to say air.
You are correct.
Good guess.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because what it does is it takes the air, and remember that we're carbon life forms. We're carbon-based life forms.
Right.
This is really eye-opening. So remember that plants take the CO2 from
Right.
the air and convert it into oxygen. So then it combines those carbons into its physical
Right.
reality. It needs the other things. Don't get me wrong. The sunlight,
Yeah.
the water, the nutrients from the soil, but the majority of that plant is actually coming from gas
Yeah.
in the air.
So then this would apply to humans as well, I would assume. So then, Dr. Hummel, is it safe to assume that you're full of hot air?
I think most people who know me assume that.
Mary, you were mentioning about on your intake forms, sometimes people aren't super honest because we all have a little bit of guilt or shame about our the things that we cheat. Have you ever heard there's an old song called Junk Food Junkie by Larry, I think it's either Gross or Grossy, I don't remember his last name, but anyway, super healthy guy. And then at night he sneaks into his cabinet to get a Twinkie or whatever. But it's a humorous take on that exact thing. So for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, look that up. Junk Food Junkie. It's a funny song.
Yeah, that's one of the things on there. You always have to put on those diet diaries is you want to say snacks.
Yeah, your cheater.
And please, underneath it, please be very honest. It's easy not to do.
Yeah, exactly.
I get it.
It's hard to be highly disciplined
Yeah.
every moment. Well, that's bringing us to a natural endpoint here. So, Mary, if you were going to leave our listeners with one piece of advice that would be like, in a nutshell, the most important thing, what would you tell people, about nutrition? What's the one thing that you would share with us?
It's so hard to narrow it down to just one thing, but I think that is where I'll take it is look at your diet and choose one thing that you're going to improve upon. And that can apply to every person because every person can change one thing to be a little bit better in their nutrition. Choose one thing, work on that for 2 weeks, establish a good habit of that one thing, and then you can move on to one more thing. I think we're all at different phases and different stages of our nutrition. There's not one thing that I can just say, this is what you need to do. start with one thing that you know is going to be, that has the research behind it that you need to improve on, and be kind to yourself, because it can be a process to change all of the habits that you've established. Be kind to yourself in that process and do those one things over and over again.
That's excellent advice. And I would also say, just like going to the gym, you'll probably do better if you have a partner. I think when you want to make changes in your lifestyle, especially something like nutrition, it can be so excellent to have a coach or partner that you do it with. And so I would just encourage people to either find Mary or people like her in their area, because this is like super important and you need support, not just your own willpower. You need some support from other people too. Thank you so much, Mary, for sharing with us today. We've loved having you on.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.